When your compost pile starts producing foul odors that drive neighbors indoors, or sits dormant for months without breaking down, the underlying problem almost always comes down to imbalanced conditions. Research from the University of Illinois Extension shows that successful composting requires 4 essential elements working in harmony: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and moisture. When any of these falls out of balance, the entire decomposition process suffers. The good news is that diagnosing and fixing these issues is straightforward once you understand what's happening at the microbial level. Understanding what makes compost smell is pretty important. A healthy compost pile should smell earthy and pleasant, similar to forest soil after rain, but when putrid ammonia-like or rotten egg odors emerge, anaerobic bacteria have taken over your pile. These microorganisms thrive in oxygen-depleted environments and produce hydrogen sulfide and other sulfur compounds as metabolic byproducts, which create those offensive smells. According to Cornell University's Composting Science and Engineering program, anaerobic conditions develop when compost becomes waterlogged or too compacted for air to penetrate. The most common trigger for smelly compost is excessive moisture combined with insufficient aeration. When you add too many nitrogen-rich greens such as fresh grass clippings, fruit peels, or vegetable scraps without balancing them with carbon-rich browns, the pile becomes dense and wet. Water fills the air spaces between particles, preventing oxygen from reaching the center of the pile. The beneficial aerobic bacteria that normally drive decomposition cannot survive without oxygen, so they die off and are replaced by anaerobic species that work much slower and produce those characteristic foul odors. Immediate steps to rescue a smelly pile are honestly pretty simple. When confronted with a smelly compost bin, your first action should be turning the entire pile with a garden fork or shovel. This single intervention introduces fresh oxygen throughout the mass and disrupts the anaerobic zones where odor-producing bacteria flourish. Studies from the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources demonstrate that turning compost can raise oxygen levels from near zero to over 15% within minutes, which is sufficient to restart aerobic decomposition. After turning, you'll want to assess the moisture level by grabbing a handful of material and giving it a good squeeze. The ideal consistency should feel like a wrung-out sponge, damp enough that maybe a drop or two of water appears when you squeeze it hard, but not so wet that water just streams out. Now, if your compost is dripping wet or forms a slick, slimy mass, that's a sign you need to add substantial amounts of dry, carbon-rich materials. Shredded cardboard works excellent for this, because it not only absorbs moisture but also creates those important air pockets. Research published in Biocycle magazine found that cardboard has a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio of around 350 to 1, making it one of the most effective materials for soaking up excess liquid and rebalancing wet compost. Dried leaves, straw, wood chips, and sawdust from untreated lumber also serve as excellent moisture absorbers. You'll want to add these materials in generous amounts. Don't be shy about incorporating 2 to 3 times the volume of browns compared to the existing wet greens. Make sure to mix them throughout the pile rather than just layering them on top. The carbon in these materials also provides food for the aerobic bacteria you're trying to encourage, giving them the energy they need to multiply and outcompete the anaerobic species. So, preventing future odor problems really comes down to managing the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio and moisture levels right from the start. The optimal CN ratio for rapid composting falls between 25 to 1 and 30 to 1, according to research from Washington State University. In practical terms, this means you'll want to use roughly 3 parts brown materials to 1 part green materials by volume. Since browns are typically drier and fluffier than greens, this ratio naturally creates the right chemical balance for efficient decomposition. Keep a dedicated supply of browns near your compost bin so you can add them each time you deposit kitchen scraps or grass clippings. A bag of shredded paper, a pile of dry leaves, or a bin of wood shavings makes it convenient to maintain the proper ratio. Each time you add a layer of greens, cover it with browns. This not only balances the chemistry but also reduces fruit fly problems and helps manage moisture by allowing excess water to evaporate through the carbon-rich layers. If you live in a region with heavy rainfall, consider covering your compost bin with a tarp or lid during wet seasons. Research from Oregon State University Extension Service shows that uncovered compost piles in high rainfall areas can become waterlogged, with moisture levels exceeding 70% by weight. This saturation drives out oxygen and creates ideal conditions for anaerobic bacteria. A simple cover allows you to control moisture by removing it during dry periods and replacing it when rain threatens. Diagnosing and fixing slow compost. While smelly compost announces its problems loudly, slow compost presents a different challenge. You might have a pile that's been sitting for 6 months or longer with little visible decomposition. When you dig into it, the materials look much the same as when you added them. This indicates that the microbial activity necessary for decomposition has stalled or never properly started. Slow decomposition typically results from insufficient nitrogen, inadequate moisture, or lack of microbial inoculants. Nitrogen serves as the protein source for composting bacteria. Without enough of it, their populations remain small and inactive. Research from the University of Missouri Extension indicates that when the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio exceeds 40:1, decomposition slows to a crawl because microorganisms cannot find enough nitrogen to build their cellular structures and reproduce. To restart a slow pile, begin by checking the moisture content. Squeeze a handful of material. If it's bone dry and crumbles apart, you need to add water. Use a watering can or hose to moisten the pile throughout, turning it as you add water to ensure even distribution. The pile should reach that same wrung-out sponge consistency mentioned earlier. Studies show that microbial activity nearly stops when moisture drops below 40%, so maintaining adequate dampness is critical. Boosting nitrogen levels for faster decomposition. Once moisture is adequate, add fresh nitrogen sources to energize the microbial community. Grass clippings from chemical-free lawns provide excellent nitrogen, with a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio of around 20:1. Fresh coffee grounds also work well, offering a ratio of about 20:1 along with additional nutrients. If you have access to animal manures from herbivores such as rabbits, chickens, horses, or cows, these rank among the most powerful compost activators. Chicken manure has a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio of approximately 7:1, making it particularly effective at jump-starting dormant piles. After adding nitrogen-rich materials, it's best to mix them through the pile, rather than just piling them on top. This way, the nutrients get distributed where they're really needed, and it helps create more uniform conditions throughout the compost. Within just a few days of adding greens and some moisture to a dry pile, you should notice the internal temperature rising, a pretty clear sign that microbial populations are expanding and decomposition is really starting to accelerate. Actually, research from the University of Florida shows that active compost piles can reach internal temperatures between 130 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit, which not only speeds up the breakdown, but also kills weed seeds and pathogens. The role of particle size and turning frequency is, honestly, pretty important. Another factor that influences decomposition speed is particle size. Smaller pieces of material break down faster because they offer more surface area for microorganisms to colonize. For example, a whole apple core might take months to decompose, while that same core chopped into half-inch pieces could break down in just weeks. Studies from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service show that reducing particle size from 4 inches to 1 inch can actually double the rate of decomposition. Turning frequency also matters, significantly for maintaining active decomposition. Each time you turn the pile, you reintroduce oxygen, redistribute moisture and nutrients, and move materials from the cooler outer edges to the hot center where decomposition occurs fastest. Research indicates that turning every 3 to 5 days during the active phase produces finished compost in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. Less frequent turning, once every week or two, still produces good results, but extends the process to about 2 to 3 months. Maintaining the perfect balance is, well, really the key. Success with composting comes down to creating an environment where beneficial aerobic bacteria can thrive. These microorganisms need oxygen to breathe, moisture to stay active, carbon for energy, and nitrogen for building proteins. When you maintain the proper balance of these elements with a 3:1 brown to green ratio, moisture at the wrung-out sponge level, and regular turning to provide oxygen, decomposition proceeds rapid and odor-free. Remember that composting is a forgiving process. Small deviations from perfect conditions won't derail your pile. The problems arise when imbalances become extreme, such as when the pile becomes waterlogged or bone dry. By paying attention to these basic principles, and making adjustments when you notice issues, you'll produce rich, finished compost that transforms your garden soil and grows healthier plants. If this guide helped you rescue your compost pile or speed up slow decomposition, subscribe to Living Soil Garden for more evidence-based gardening techniques that work. And hey, share this resource with fellow gardeners who might be struggling with their compost so we can all grow better gardens together.